mentioned, of course, we advertise the topic as a logical framework approach to project appraisal. Probably as I make progress, I will explain why at the last minute I decided to modify it slightly to the logical framework approach to project design rather than project appraisal per se. And within this brief period, I'm going to talk about, I'll give a brief intro and then give a definition to the logical framework, at least from what some popular users of the framework, especially from the international community, what they see or say about the logical framework approach, and then the components of a typical, log frame. And then I would be a bit more direct to rather zoom in straight to present a sample log frame for a hypothetical project, which I believe will make things easier for us to conceptualize. Typically, if you want to go through the traditional way of delivering this aspect of project management, there are some things you would want to do as steps towards the eventual development of the framework, which I call the ingredients of a successful logical framework approach. But I think within the time that we have being short, it will be more helpful to rather go direct, present what the framework is, so that when we now come back to look at these ingredients, they will be better appreciated. Then, as we contemplate on probably using the logical framework approach for any project design, it will be useful to understand what its merits are and what's the arguments that sometimes are made against it. And of course, as we look at that, we will also look at some general approaches to deal with the known demerits. And then I'll end with some concluding remarks. I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. By way of introduction, I would want to remind ourselves, of course, as engineers, as people in development projects, we've always known that projects are designed to address problems or to achieve some development goals. And it is very important that in designing a project or looking at appraising a project, we want to be sure that the chances of the project activities or the deliverables leading to some expected outcomes or development outcomes would not be left to chance. There should always be a conscious effort to be sure that there is a clear logic between the project inputs and the project outcomes. And especially where we want to seek funding, it is projects that are able to demonstrate a clear linkage between its activities or results and some other national or global development goals that are most likely to attract funding. And this is where the logical framework approach comes in as a very strong tool to help you to be able to not just satisfy yourself for achieving project results, but also to be able to consciously link the project results to some national development or some global development goals, so that you will be able to make an appeal to development partners and other people from whom you might want to seek funding, especially if you aspire to seek funding from European sources. I know the European Commission, it's almost like something mandatory. Part of the application processes, you would need to demonstrate, the logic, the intervention logic, and it's almost something that you always have to do to add a logical framework which clearly shows how your intervention is going to contribute to development. And by this, the logical framework approach helps you to predetermine or assess right from the beginning what's going to be the linkage between the project activities and the intended results that you want to have at the project level. And then again, assuming the results of the project are achieved or the outputs are delivered, how is that guaranteed, or how is that going to lead to some expected outcomes? And should we achieve the outcome at the project level, we would need to be able to demonstrate, and this framework will help you to be able to tell clearly the overall contribution of the project to national development goals. Another thing that the logical framework approach would help you to do is to consciously assess what indicators or means by which you are going to assess or evaluate the effectiveness of your project. You can deliver a project all right, but as to whether it's been effective in addressing the problems you want to address is also a different thing. Again, we're looking at the logical framework approach as one that would also help you to be able to predetermine, assess right from the beginning what the human resource and material inputs would be to deliver the results, and also to think through what risks and constraints you would need to overcome as you go ahead with your project. And I'll share these few definitions that I found from some development partners. The Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, that is NORAD, sees the logical framework approach as a management tool that facilitates the planning, implementation, and evaluation of a project. So it is not just an appraisal tool, but I mean a project management tool in itself. And GTZ sees it as a system of procedures and instruments for objective-oriented project planning. That is perhaps the biggest strength of the logical framework approach, the fact that it's objective-oriented, result-oriented. And the Spanish Agency for International Development also sees it as an analytical tool for objective-oriented project planning and management. Typically, if you have a typical logical framework, it comes as a matrix, a 4x4 matrix in which you are able to demonstrate the intervention logic. And we will, in a brief moment, go through what actually constitutes the intervention logic and what indicators you are going to use to objectively verify your results, the sources and means of information for verification, and then whatever assumptions or external conditions that must exist for you to deliver the project. And I want to make use of this template that is commonly found in European Union proposals, call for proposal, telling applicants what actually they expect under each of these, so that as we familiarize ourselves with this, then we can know what is expected of us. I always like starting from the specific objective or the purpose, because mostly for us at the project level, that is what you are interested in. And certainly before we carry out any project, there must be some specific objective, some problem that we're trying to solve. And so you would always ask yourself, what specific objective are the actions that you want to undertake in the project intended to achieve to contribute to the overall goal? And this, for example, maybe we're carrying out a project to address a problem of congestion at an intersection. At the end of the day, what we want to see is that the traffic flow has improved. I mean, time for passing through the intersection is reduced. That will be the overall goal, what you call the purpose of the project. And to get this done, you would have to ask yourself, what has to be achieved at the project level before that goal can be achieved? In other words, what are the outputs that will be expected from the project if we want to achieve that goal? And one thing I like about the logical framework approach is the fact that it helps you to distinguish between the project purpose or the project objective and the output or the results, what you want to achieve. So in this case, assuming we want to improve upon the traffic flow at the intersection, the specific outputs that we might want to do or the project seeks to do might be maybe signaling. That is what we can say, yes, the project has delivered this. We have provided, we have signalized the intersection. And once that is done, the results that we are expecting out of it, the problem we want to solve, in this case, that is what we call a purpose. That is, in this case, making it easier to traverse the intersection or to reduce the time it takes. So you would want to think through this. And then before you can deliver the outputs, you would want to now decide what activities would be required for us to get that done. Of course, there will be some probably survey to check the traffic volumes. You would want to, some designs will be done, some construction or something will be done. These are the activities that would be carried out in the project to deliver the output of signalizing the intersection, all with the purpose of delivering, all with the purpose of making sure we reduce traffic, the travel time through the intersection. Normally, this is what many of us as engineers would want to concern ourselves about. But usually beyond the project, you would want to demonstrate that after we have achieved the purpose of the project, there is a certain overall or broader objective which the action will contribute to. In this case, we would want to, make sure we enhance productivity of the people. If people get stuck in traffic for a very long time, that is going to waste productive time. So you want to demonstrate that after the actions have been taken, the purpose of the project delivered, there is going to be a contribution to a certain overall national development aspiration, which in this case is the overall goal. So when we look at this first column, that is the intervention logic, perhaps the most important in this exercise, we would want to be sure that we are not undertaking certain activities that are kind of haphazard, but rather specifically linked to what the project output is, what the project is intended to deliver. And you would, at this stage, want to assess how that one is going to solve the problem on hand. And you would also want to demonstrate how the problem after being solved is going to contribute to overall national development. In all these, at the planning stage, you would have to establish indicators. You would have to be able to demonstrate that after the action has been carried out, this is what we will see. And that is what you do in the next column, where you have objectively verifiable indicators. So assuming there is a contribution to the overall objective, what are the key indicators that are related to the overall objective that we are going to see? And here I must say that it is not always easy or possible to find indicators to contribute to indicators to measure the contribution of a project to the overall goal. And I'll explain this. Let's say, for example, we have a project that is aimed at minimizing travel time on a particular road. We all can appreciate that, yes, of course, this is good. It enhances productivity, but you might find it difficult to really show by a specific indicator that this is the contribution specifically from this project towards the overall productivity of the nation. And that is something that will be difficult to do because of the many factors that are involved. So in some literature, you would find even that column being blank, but in some cases, you can do that. In the example that I'll share with you, we can find an indicator that will help us to assess what the contribution of the project is so far as overall national development is concerned. But at the project level, when you say the project specific objective or the purpose, this is what it is. It is mandatory. You must be able to demonstrate that, yes, this has been done. And you would have to think through what indicators clearly show that the objectives of the actions have been achieved. We will look at that in the example that I will share. And then when we say we have completed a project, obviously the project outputs delivered, there should also be indicators, and you ask yourself, what are the indicators to measure whether or to what extent the expected results have been achieved? When it comes to the activities, practically at this level, what you do is not necessarily indicators per se, but you would want to, at this point, indicate the inputs. What are the means required to implement these activities? And for each of these indicators, you would have to demonstrate the source of information or the means by which you are going to verify it. And in the last column, this is where you must indicate any assumptions that must exist, or any conditions that must exist, or what potential external factors could undermine the relationship between your activities and expected results, or between the results and the specific objectives, and so on and so forth. With this general overview, I would want to straight away go through this. I'll be shuttling between this slide and the next one. Sorry, I cannot scroll down. I don't know. Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, this is too packed, but I just needed to have all that here on one slide. So I hope we can bear with me. It's a bit too packed. I'll be commuting between this and the previous slide to see how the various boxes and the typical logical framework metrics can be approached. So as I said, this is a hypothetical project I'm just using to demonstrate how the logical framework approach may be used for project design or project planning. Some projects are a little bit straightforward, and sometimes you might not need to belabor the connections with development and all that. But there are others for which you need a strong argument. I decided to choose the provision of rest stops on major national roads, assuming that is an intervention we want to undertake, and see how we can develop a logical framework or use a logical framework approach to develop that. As I said, I often would want to start from the purpose. At the project level, what are we trying to address? And so coming to this box here at the purpose under the project narrative, we would want to demonstrate what we want to achieve with that project. In this case, we want to, let's say we want to reduce driver and passenger travel stress or travel fatigue on the side of drivers and passengers. So that is what the purpose of the project is. We would have to be able to demonstrate how that one contributes to overall national development goals. And in this case, we may say that, yes, this will promote road safety. If drivers probably engage in long non-stop driving, we anticipate that that could lead to accidents. And so we want to improve road safety. And that by extension may be expected to also promote tourism. If this is what we want to achieve, then what are the project's deliverables? What should be delivered by the project? And we have to list all of them. Rest stop facilities have to be provided. Service providers will have to be recruited to provide some services, and then there will be some public sensitization. Let me say here that I've done this without the level of experience that a transportation engineer would have done. So pardon me in terms of the content, if it is not probably what you would have expected, but it's all good to make the discussion interesting, because when we look at the ingredients, then you'll see that we can do a critique of this properly. So that will be the project deliverables. And in terms of the activity, normally you would want to list the deliverables because you are now going to indicate what activities will have to be undertaken. For the want of space, I just listed a few activities for the first and the second deliverable. That is, first you will have to identify and acquire a site. We have to prepare technical designs. We have to construct the facilities. For service recruitment of service providers, we might have to do some advertisements and then interview and select applicants. Now, when it comes to the indicators, we will have to be able to show that if we are able to reduce driver or passenger travel stress, what can be an evidence? And in this case, you have the number of maybe driver fatigue related accidents or passenger rating of level of travel stress could be an indicator, and that should be clear. And you would have to also demonstrate where that information can be obtained from. That information, in this case, you'll get from road accident data, or you might want to carry out a passenger survey at the baseline and then at the end of the project. But in all these, you would also have to be sure, you also have to note the assumptions or the external conditions that will make this possible. We may achieve the goals of the project, but what about if drivers will not patronize the facility? So this will become an assumption that the drivers will patronize the facility, and then the passengers will be cooperative. And if we are saying that number of driver fatigue related accidents will reduce, or passenger rating of travel stress will be an indicator, then of course other road traffic conditions will have to remain the same. Will have to remain the same for us to be able to see the effect of all this that we have provided. Similarly, when we come to the overall goal that we want to contribute to, when it comes to improvement in road safety, then maybe the total number of road accidents can be an indicator. And by the same means, we'll get that from road accident data. And again, this is based on, this is on the premise that other road safety factors will remain the same. So that is how you demonstrate this. For the project's expected results, when it comes to the rest stop facilities, the provision, the indicator will be that the physical facilities have been provided. This could be verified by maybe looking at as-built drawings or facility pictures. And that is if there are suitable sites available. So in terms of the assumptions, I mean, there are suitable sites available, and then eventually we'll get a building permit to carry out the project. Then we'll do that for the next output, which is in this case the service providers, the recruitment of service providers. So the indicator will be that the service providers have been engaged. The appointment or contract letters can be a means of verification. And for public sensitization programs carried out, this may be verified from, say, radio or television adverts or talk shows. And what will make sure that this will actually lead to the results that we need? It means that the drivers and the general public will be receptive to the sensitization messages. If the people are like, well, you have said it, but we will not mind, then you will not see the result. Then when it comes to the activities, at this point, once you identify it comes to the activities, it is about the inputs. At this point, the emphasis is not the indicator, but the inputs, what should go into getting the activity done. Of course, if you are going to identify an acquired site, of course, some payments will have to be made, or maybe some government land might be allocated. And as I showed from the previous slide, you give the inputs here, you state the inputs, and then you would want to also indicate some kind of sources of information to show that, yes, this activity has been done, to measure progress, and then indicate the cost that will be associated with that. So going back, you'll see that we would want to, for each of these activities, for example, acquisition of land title could be a means of verification, and then we will have to put a cost on it. If it comes to preparation of technical designs, facility, the inputs here will be architectural and engineering services. Payments to architects will have to, and engineers will be part of the input. Then we can have the facility design reports as a means of really verifying that progress has been made and what the cost will be, and so on and so forth. I strike out some of the indicators here to indicate. Sometimes some of the indicators are so obvious we might not need, some of the assumptions are obvious. It is not mandatory that you must always state an assumption. I mean, it's in cases where you foresee something can be a risk. That is when you indicate it. But for a project like this, we could almost always take it for granted that expertise will be available and all that. So that is what you do as an overall overview of the logical framework approach. But normally, before you get to this point to produce the metrics, there are some preparatory works that have to be done. And I felt that seeing what is expected in the framework or in the approach as an overview will make the subsequent discussion more interesting. And so I now come to this point where we will make reference to what we have said previously. We would want to emphasize the fact that for us to be able to have an effective or a successful logical framework approach in project design, there should be effective stakeholder analysis and involvement. We would want to talk about the fact that there is the need for comprehensive and then consultative problem analysis. Then when it comes to the choice of indicators, we will talk about how to make the choice of indicators very sharp and appropriate. And then the case of the assumptions about potential risk and constraints. Now, effective stakeholder analysis and involvement. This is where we have to decide right from the beginning of the project who can affect or will be affected by the project. And one way of also making the project, the stakeholder analysis or the involvement quite effective is to be able to establish the interest of all the stakeholders. In this case, drivers, the service providers, the passengers. What are their interests so far as the project that we just discussed is mentioned, and how do they see the problem at hand? Their perspective of the problem is going to enrich the problem analysis. And what is their official mandate or unofficial influence? Some people, like the drivers union, can sometimes gag up against certain road management, road traffic management interventions. And we would want to also ask what resources they can bring on board. Obviously, it can be quite a tedious and time-consuming exercise, but it's always worthwhile. And when it comes to community participation, stakeholder analysis, I've always related it to this group of guys. They want to pull the box on the ground. Somebody said there are wheels for it. Say we don't have time. We are too busy. You know, sometimes that's what we do. We feel that stakeholder involvement is a bit too difficult and all that. But if we take a bit of time to do that and put the wheels under the project, it's able to help us to move faster and have a bit more smooth project. Then again, there should be comprehensive and a consultative problem analysis. Typically, we will have to delve a bit deeper. The problem might be generally known, but it would have to be characterized. You know, what is the problem we are solving? Is it driver fatigue? That's fine. What is causing the problem? Are we saying the problem is being caused by long, non-stop driving? Couldn't it be other things? So by the time we do the problem analysis, we might realize that, no, we don't even need that kind of intervention that maybe we are thinking about. And are there more fundamental causes? Yes, if the drivers are not stopping and driving for long and so there are accidents, what makes the drivers not to stop? If it is the case that, well, they don't like stopping because the road is generally known to be a bit a place that is dangerous, maybe robbers, you know, patronize that road. And even when you stop in a community, you cannot be sure. So maybe providing a safe, guarded place where drivers can stop will encourage drivers to stop. Then maybe fine, we might be spot on. But if it so happens that the drivers are not stopping because there are always passengers at the other end of the road and they are in a hurry to go and pick other passengers and make more money. If that is the case, you'll get that one revealed through your projects, your problem analysis. Then you might come to the realization that then the solution does not lie in providing rest stops along the road. And this is where you also ask yourself, what is the problem also leading to? I mean, does it significantly affect road safety? At this level, you would then be able to see the relationship between the intervention you are thinking of and the overall national development goal. All this should lead to the development of a problem tree so that you'll be able to link all these things together. Unfortunately, I knew there wouldn't be much time to give an example of a problem tree. But from the problem tree, then we turn it around into objective tree or the intervention logic. This is where we know that the interventions we are putting in place are actually in response to problems we have identified. And I mean, it said once a problem is well stated and it's half solved. We learn from logical thinking that if the premise is wrong, the conclusions are wrong. So if the problem is misconceived, then the solution would also be misconceived. So that is one thing we need to know. You can be very sincere about the intervention, but maybe you would have still gotten it wrong altogether. Then, in terms of the choice of indicators, we have always known of SMART, and I wouldn't belabor that. SMART indicators, but the European Commission also, recommends this RACER criteria. And by this, they mean that the indicator should be relevant. That is closely linked to the objectives. And then it should be accepted by the partners. This is why stakeholder participation becomes very important. It should be credible for non-experts, unambiguous. It shouldn't take so much effort to be able to show the relationship between the indicator and the outcome we are looking for. It should be easy to monitor, and then it should be robust against manipulations so that people will not just be doing whatever they want. And when it comes to indicators, they find ways of cooking it out. It should be stated in a neutral way, with a clear unit of measure. If it is quantitative, for example, maybe the number of or the percentage of the ratio of, etc. And for qualitative indicators, you might want to give the status of, the degree of, the level of, or the extent to which these are ways of stating the indicators. Then the assumptions about external risk and constraints. For want of a better illustration, let me go a bit scriptural here. You know, it's written in Psalm number 11, verse 13, that if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? If what you think is going to lead to what, is eventually made useless by some external factors, then what can you do? And I'm having COVID-19 on my mind. I'm having Russia-Ukraine war on my mind. You should be able to foresee as much as possible what could be external factors that would undermine the project in such a way that you may achieve the project result, but you might still not see what you hoped to see as the contribution to the development that you wanted. So you should clearly articulate the external influences and factors which can affect the causal linkages, that is, from the activities to the results. After achieving the activities, is there any possible thing that could happen that with the results may not be realized? After achieving project results, how or what can prevent the immediate outcome from being realized, and so on and so forth. External risks may be pardoned, of course, but if we overlook internal constraints, it may attract sanctions. And so we need to employ an appropriate risk analysis to preempt the potential internal risk and adopt mitigating measures when it comes to internal risk. One common sense approach is to seek to know why previous efforts or similar projects might have failed. So you could learn from that. And then, yes, so that is, the number 4 ingredient, very important. I would briefly want to just look at the merits and demerits of the LFA, that is the logical framework approach. Of course, it presents all the key components of a project in a concise, coherent way. And it clearly distinguishes among project activities, project results, and then the objectives, and allows easy check of project logic, and identifies inconsistencies and omissions. So at the end of the day, you look at the relationship between your activities, the outputs, the outcome, and then the overall development goal, and you would then really want to interrogate it to say, yes, am I really going to achieve that? And it facilitates review of the activity progress and prompts where adjustments are needed. And it instills a sense of accountability and transparency among project parties, because indicators and everything are well.
Hello, Prof. Hello, Prof.
Hello,
Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay,
sir.
Okay, so let me give you 3 minutes to run up.
I think that will be enough.
Thank you.
Good. But on the downside, quite often, the logical framework approach has been criticized as failing to capture the complexity of development projects. So it's like, are you sure? I mean, everything that matters so far as a big project or something is concerned can be summed up in just a slide or in a couple of sheets. That is one criticism. And also criticized as being rigid, intimidating, and time-consuming. People are sometimes just afraid to say, hey, the indicators are just there. This must be achieved at this time and at that time. And sometimes it's a bit scary to know that it's expected of me and everything is written in black and white. And the tendency to ignore stakeholder participation tends to make the LFA appear as a top-down planning tool. If we ignore stakeholder participation, especially if we don't go bottom-up, then it comes across as a top-down planning tool. And so we note these key points, which are related to the those demerits. You know, we should understand that the log frame approach isn't intended to show every detail of a project. That shouldn't necessarily be the goal. You show the key results and the key things you want to assess. And again, the process may be time consuming initially, as I've said, but the log frame eventually saves time, at all other stages of the project. And if a bottom-up approach is adopted, then the LFA lends itself to flexibility, transparency, and builds trust among partners. By way of conclusion, I'll say that the logical framework approach is highly effective. It's a very highly effective strategic planning and then management tool, which helps to exert control over the entire project life cycle. And it helps to see the bigger picture when planning a project, and also ensures the project plan achieves what it should. Stakeholder involvement is a key requirement for success, and it could be a bit painstaking to go through the logical framework approach, but it ends up as a rewarding project management tool. Credit to these sources that I picked some information from. And always remember, don't be too busy. Let's go through the trouble. Stakeholder participation, completing the framework can be a bit tiring, but eventually it pays to have a project thought through with the logical framework approach. Thank you very much.